Our excavations have completely blown the lid, really, on our understanding of the Stonehenge landscape.
I feel very privileged to be able to be the guardian of this landscape.
Stonehenge has the capability of regenerating South Wiltshire.
My name's Professor David Jakes, and I'm the project director of the Blickmead dig. And Blickmead is about a couple of kilometres from Stonehenge, and it's a site that's revealing the earliest stories in that landscape, if you like, the backstory to Stonehenge. And as such, it's a unique national archive for Britain and also for northwestern Europe. Stonehenge itself dates back to around 3000 BC, so it's about 5,000 years old. But it's not the earliest or the latest prehistoric monument in that landscape. It's basically now providing us with the oldest stories about British people anywhere, and it's got evidence of people living in and around the area for the longest of any time period in British history. We know from Blickmead that people were putting monuments up on the same knoll as where the stones are just after the Ice Age, so around 8000 BC, and they seem to have been venerating it for a long time, all the way through to the stones being erected. It might be that at the beginning it was a brilliant place to hunt really large animals, and there would have been like loads of stories, and sport would have been part of it, and parties would have been part of that, as well as religion. And then by the time the stones come up, it's almost as though they're being put in partly for sort of acts of memory reason. People are looking back to the earlier hunter ancestors. Later on, in the early Bronze Age, this is about 500 years or so after the last phase of stone building at Stonehenge, we can see that people are building large round barrows in response to it. And it almost looks as though people are looking back. They're looking to sort of connect with ancestors. And then later on still, people are carving axes in the monument, so in and around the monument, so that's happening about 1,000 years or so after it was built, perhaps even a little bit later than that. One of the fascinating things really is just different people's reactions to Stonehenge across time. Stonehenge landscape shows a lot of evidence of people coming from all over Britain to visit it, and that doesn't just happen at the time the stones go up. It happens in the hunter-gatherer period. It's basically been a multicultural melting pot for a really long time, but you really see this in its full glory at the time of Stonehenge, where there are people coming from across the continent to visit it. People are even taking their cattle from as far north perhaps as the Orkneys to all the way down to Stonehenge, so it has an incredibly powerful place. Clearly a crucial hub point where people could be exchanging ideas and technologies and possibly even genes. So it would have been very important for the establishment of Britain, and possibly, in fact, very important for keeping the peace. The government and Highways England are pushing ahead with a scheme to put two huge entrance and exits within the World Heritage Site. In our case at Blickmead, our site is directly impacted because in order to filter the traffic down to the eastern gateway or portal, a huge flyover is going to be built, which is at least 8 metres high. It runs across an area of 500 metres. What it will do is the sheer weight of it, although it is on the existing footprint of the road as it stands, is highly likely to take the water table down in the immediate area. What will happen then is that the organic remains of the site will perish within 5 years. That's not being hyperbolic. We've got a really good example of that happening already in the 21st century. I think that there's great pressure on heritage bodies because of cuts. English Heritage are going to get all of their grant taken out by 2022, and that has a serious consequence here because Stonehenge for a long time has floated English heritage. A cynic might argue that if you build a tunnel you can't see the stones and therefore you may get more footfall into the visitors centre and people will be paying their £18 to £19 entrance fee. That would be a cynical point of view. It would be a great shame if that's true, because for that just piece of short-term politics we're taking out thousands of years of history in the past and let's hope a millennia of future research.
Because the Stonehenge Visitor Centre has now been moved to the other side of Stonehenge, the western side of Stonehenge, what effectively that means is everybody has to pass Stonehenge to get to the visitor centre. And the visitor centre is an attraction and therefore it's a stopping point. There's been a bit of a mistake made here. If the visitor centre was in Amesbury, the traffic that goes past it and on past Stonehenge aren't stopping. They keep going. Do you see what I mean? They go on down to the West Country. So by putting a tunnel in, all that will happen is that traffic will go faster down the hill past Amesbury, missing the junction of Amesbury, into a tunnel, and as soon as they get to the other end of the tunnel, they'll be faced with a junction. And you know what happens on busy roads when there's junctions? We'll have a traffic jam underground instead of above ground.
It's very interesting when you look at the road proposals, and at the beginning of the consultation this year I was very surprised that the heritage bodies were putting their name behind a route that was so damaging in the World Heritage Site, because you've got to remember that it's not just Stonehenge, it's Stonehenge and the associated monuments within the landscape. Bush barrow, arguably the most important barrow in the country. When you look in the landscape and you look, and we've got Stonehenge behind us, the barrow groups stretch around behind me, you look up on the ridges around us. This is obviously a very important place.
English Heritage and the National Trust are aware of us, but they are turning a blind eye, frankly, to the fact that you can't understand Stonehenge now without understanding Blickmead.
What are we saying about finding this extremely important site and then making changes which could damage both the archaeology and the reputation of the site? I mean, something is either special or it isn't special. The World Heritage Site is special or it's not special.
Previous schemes have seen the heritage bodies protecting the whole of the site, but it was a big shock to realise that on this occasion landowners like myself with the barrows, we feel that we have been left on our own, and people in the media, people listen to National Trust and English Heritage because they are known bodies, and they know how to raise awareness of things. I'm a farmer, I'm a guardian, I don't know how to raise awareness, I don't know who to contact, I don't know how to tell people of my plight. I do what I can, but I am insignificant.
We've got a flyover that is literally 20 metres away from our most northern trench. That's planned to be 7 metres high with a 4 metre high street lights running along it. So this is likely to really reduce the water table, and of course the tunnel gateway is about 700 metres to the west. The real deep disappointment is with the very short term, from my point of view, planning about the tunnel, because the infrastructure planned is extremely likely to drop the water table here. We've got evidence from that, empirical evidence, that borehole surveys taken along the side of the spring in the 1950s showed peat levels averaging about 7 to 8 feet. But after the A303 got widened in the 60s, which was a much smaller infrastructural project, the peat has shrunk to about 10 centimetres. So it's just that organic layer, waterlogged layer, that is holding these organics. We have to really think about throwing the ball to future generations. This site was unknown 5 years ago, And now we can see that there's definitely a Mesolithic backstory to Stonehenge. It makes Stonehenge even more special. But if the water table drops by about 5 centimetres, that's all. So it's a tiny, tiny amount, less than the size of a watch. Just that little limit, it'll take out all of the organics, that's all the animal bones and the pollen and the DNA that's being preserved right now. It'll take it out in about 5 years. Blickmead is a new discovery within the World Heritage Site, and it's casting light now on the origins of the Stonehenge landscape and also the origins of Britain, because we're finding evidence of people living there just after the Ice Age. So these would have been the first Britons, if you like, the first people who are coming back to the island after the thousands of years worth of completely uninhabitable climate conditions. And Blickmead is really important in a number of ways, but one of them is it shows evidence for the communities who built the first monuments actually at Stonehenge, which is really remarkable that people were putting things up just after the Ice Age. But I think what makes it even more special really is that people are coming back there again and again and again. We've got 20 radiocarbon dates that show people coming back from 8000 BC all the way through to 3600 BC. So it's a really remarkable place. Even London hasn't been visited and lived in as long as Blickmead was. So it's on those sorts of scales. So it's really, really important to try and make sense of it. Now, the Blickmead project came into being really as a local community project, and the local community in question were Amesbury, people in Amesbury, which is the nearest town to the Stonehenge landscape. Sort of place actually that stereotypically archaeologists and academics might not have bothered with because they thought that perhaps people wouldn't be very interested in local history, but it's absolutely not the case.
The tunnel isn't a lifetime solution. It is only the length of time the tunnel will last. And when I spoke to the engineers about it last year, they said they designed, and I know this, 125-year life. 125 year on a 5,000 year site is not long, is it? And it's our great-great-grandchildren's problem then. And when it comes to the end of its life, they can't just leave it there. So what would have to happen is they've either got to remove it or have some lifetime solution in that stops the landscape being damaged. Then there's a cubic kilometre of phosphatic chalk coming out. Where does that go? Where do you put it to? How do you deal with it? How do you make it safe? It's very frightening, actually. I just hope that at some stage somebody realises that this isn't about today or tomorrow. This is about the future. This is about protecting this wonderful environment for future generations. And putting that in there, all we're going to do is just destroy it.
I think it might make it worse with the flyover that's coming. I'm not sure it would make much of a difference on the traffic within Amesbury itself if the 303 was quieter. The people in Amesbury did say that they thought that the traffic problems needed sorting out. They also said that they put the World Heritage Site top of their priorities of keeping the World Heritage Site and keeping it natural and making it look better. They put that at the top, but when asked if they wanted the tunnel, they said no. The people of Amesbury really feel like they're being ignored a lot. Yeah, and it's, Stonehenge is ours, it belongs in our town, and if whatever you do to that has a knock-on effect with us. It seems to me that the tunnel is the least logical of all of the ideas that have been bouncing around for the past 30 years.
UNESCO's position on that is quite simply that you cannot introduce something, no matter what the benefits, if there is going to be further damage, and there will be further damage either side.
Stonehenge is a big part of our actual history. We want a solution that suits everything, not just sort of one tiny part of it.
It's not possible to talk about the tunnel in any form of benefit. Demand has changed with all of these things. And you could keep going with that equation and say eventually if you're going to put a tunnel in, it would go under the whole site. But would we ever be able to afford that? I don't know.
There are times when the 303 is very busy, but it's not all the time. You know, on a Friday afternoon that it will be very busy coming out of London, and arguably also on a Sunday evening, people coming from the West Country back to London. So you know there are certain times when it's going to be busy. but it's not like that all the time.
So why invest a public consultation into a location for a tunnel which was a non-starter? That's quite a strange thing to do.
I quite like to see the stones as I drive past. I mean, arguably the stones have been given to the nation, and they haven't really been given to the nation for English Heritage to also charge £15.50 for the privilege to be able to see them.
At either end of the World Heritage Site, on the A303, there is a white notice with a sign telling you enter the World Heritage Site. What else is there in the landscape that helps people understand where they are and its importance?
Now, when we started this excavation last year, we had no thought that we would be hitting this. The research plan, which was like nice and solid, was that we were moving from the occupation site to what we thought was the spring, and this would be standard archaeological practice. You establish the relationships between the two places. So we expected it to be wet, and as you can see that this is a levelled platform.
15 years ago, we didn't know about all the sites that have been discovered by the Hidden Landscapes Project. And even now, we're only starting to begin to understand how many new sites there are out there. There's just so many questions that build up around the archaeological content of sites, the position of sites, the interrelationship of sites. I mean, they are endless. But the important thing is that you mustn't really cut off avenues of discovery.
Our excavations have completely blown the lid, really, on our understanding of the Stonehenge landscape, because up until this project, we thought that this landscape was pretty much empty up until about 3,500 BC, and that there was really nothing there across the period from the end of the Ice Age until the middle to late Neolithic. Suddenly, we can see that there are hunters here from just after the Ice Age, and they're coming back again and again and again, all the way through to a potential contact point with the first farmers in the Neolithic around 4000 BC. It couldn't be bigger. It's a real paradigm shift, because simply it makes Stonehenge much more special, much more of a long-term site of the sacred, if you like, than anybody imagined.
The approach to archaeology has changed radically in the last 50 years. It's that whole chain of discovery and understanding, and it may not even be in our lifetime that we begin to understand the things that they've discovered. But it's definitely the wrong time to be cutting off any avenue to investigate those things further.
Blickmead is, for example, much older than the pyramids. The pyramids date back to around about 5,000 years, so 3,000 BC. Our radiocarbon dates go all the way back to about 8,000 BC here, and they link the first monument building at Stonehenge, which is around that time, with this site directly. This is a really key place, not just for Stonehenge, not just for Britain, but for Europe actually, in our way of understanding how hunter-gatherers are probably more sophisticated, did different things depending on their locality than other groups. So this is a project about how humanity is evolving and how we've always got an instinct for hub points. I'd say there always seems to have been an instinct for multiculturalism, that we've got evidence of different groups of people coming here, ideas coming off that, new technological advances coming from that. We have only dug 40 square metres since 2005 because we've had constraints from landowners and in terms of grants therein. 40 square metres has revealed over 36,000 pieces of work flint. We now think just on the back of this dig that pushes it over the 40,000 mark. We've got nearly 2,500 animal bones dating from the Mesolithic. It's the most tremendous potential. Even where we are now, underneath our feet, there is likely to be hunter-gatherer and later prehistoric occupancy. We've been so lucky that the Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project have been incredibly helpful and supportive of our work, and they've provided for free often state-of-the-art ground-penetrating radar. And so, for example, Trench 24, which we've looked at, the terrace there that we picked up on and the platform, we can see that goes on for another 30 feet, so that's a good 7 metres more, and that's all been picked up in time slices from the radar. Just this morning we found a further 4 huge aurochs teeth, and aurochs are these giant wild cows. They could feed about 200 people at one go, which again gives you the clue about this place being a hub point. It's so exciting because it will mean that we'll be able to recreate this hunter-gatherer environment for the first time for everybody. Shall I show you what we've been using, Luke, to do it? It's a bit unorthodox. It's a spoon handle. Because what we didn't want to do was to make it look, there's no point troweling it to make it flat. We want to try and keep this type of moonscape there, so that involves just tweaking it really gently. It's quite very slow work, cleaning round it and then just putting things up to try and keep the profile. Amesbury community stereotypically wouldn't be the typical place that archaeologists or academics would approach. It's a pretty tough working class place in many respects, and I think that people in the past have just thought that type of community doesn't particularly take an interest in its local history, but it's absolutely the opposite. The Amesbury people got right behind the project from the get-go, whether it's making sandwiches for people on the dig, people donating money for radiocarbon dates, people providing shovels, spades, or just themselves really to work on the site. It's been a really rare and actually, to be honest, quite beautiful project in that respect. Something marvellous has come out of it. When you're making sense of archaeology, you're making sense of everyone. You've got the whole community that you're digging up, and actually it's really important to have as many different type of angles of reference to make sense of those people's lives as possible. It's not archaeologists who buried the material, it's just real people, and you need to have as many real people there as possible.
But the real fundamental question for me is why? Why do we need a tunnel there? The feedback I've been getting is, yes, but what we're trying to do is bring the landscape back so that when you're stood at the stones you don't see the cars. But realistically, you won't see the stones ever again. So as soon as the tunnel goes in, nobody will ever be able to see the stones unless they pay.
I can see that the other roads that lead towards the 303, they're becoming more busy, and I would almost suggest that we need a bypass around the World Heritage Site rather than something through the World Heritage Site. But what do I know? I'm only a farmer.
At the moment, the only problem we have is a bit of rat running. The way to deal with it is all traffic to Stonehenge via Countess Road. So you signpost down to Countess, all traffic that way. What that immediately does is that frees up then the 303 to flow. So it stops them taking the junction at Winterbourne Stoke at the other end. And so it's signage. Bit of signage, yeah, a few £100, and you would, maybe not cure it all, but you would just bring down the traffic problem.
If we could work another way of being able to go round the World Heritage Site, or perhaps using the Salisbury bypass and keep this road as a toll road but free for local people, we would have done the World Heritage Site, Stonehenge, and the people of this country an enormous favour.
So say to people, if you want to go and see the stones and still have that, beautiful view of the stones you go over the hill, then a small payment to do that.
So we've got all of these amazing stories to intact about our past. It's all of our past, and basically they're under direct threat by this tunnel plan.
David, could you give us a clap, please? All right, I'm ready when you are.